I got a question for you guys, kind of on a topic I've been thinking about within this Christian dating community. Some of the problems posed is, so we know pretty much scientifically that a relationship, it's like 2 years where it's like that dopamine phase that where a lot of them break off after that ends. Christians get married in like a year. So you're deciding a lifelong decision when you're in the dopamine stage. Mm-hmm. And there's really no way around it. Because it's like, and especially if you want to do it morally right, it's like a paradox.
I think we need to talk about the third person in the room, which is God, Jesus. So would that work in a secular circumstance? I would say probably less. Mm-hmm. If both of them believe and love the Lord and have an active relationship that constitutes reading the Bible together, praying together, reading the literature, having fellowship with others, I would say it would work very well.
Well,
because
clearly
you have the third,
it does,
right? You have the person, God, the third person in the room. Whereas secularly, you don't have that those checks in account. The Bible, you don't have that there.
Yeah.
So it's just my word against yours, and then who's gonna win? And gosh,
well, if you look at the idea of why there would be all these hormones involved to begin with. The idea is that you meet somebody, you have a child, you procreate, and to get you through those rough times where the wife is literally pregnant and you have to take care of her, you have these extra hormones to help you do that, and vice versa. It's the only way you're going to get through primitive man having a baby. It's just the only way it's going to happen. So, like this, we have to deal with in current times, modern times. Obviously, we don't fighting for survival. Like, there's plenty of food. We live in a modern world, so we go out and party. We go out and basically just have fun. When we should be putting the due diligence into the relationship and putting that foundationary groundwork down, which is what you should be doing. But that's the reason why we have all these hormones, is so we could survive back in the day with a child. Because usually we were having babies as soon as there was attraction.
I think so, yeah.
That's the way it went. You found someone you liked, you had a baby with them, and then you had to raise that baby. And that happened in the span of a few months. And that's when you were in the honeymoon phase. And by the time the 2 years that you're saying is up, usually it was like the father was like, everyone was kind of able to kind of get on, the kids walking around, it's a little bit more.
But I think it was
able.
frowned upon to be a serial dater. I mean, now we all know it's a great drug to be in love, but it's not being in love. Really, it's just having somebody accept you of the opposite sex and generally feel good about that. And I've known tons of young people who they date for 3 months. The hard work starts coming up. They don't have a kid, obviously. They've just been having sex and going places. That's nice. And then that runs out and they meet somebody new and they want to perpetuate that wonderful twitterpation. And they end up doing themselves serious harm. So I know that when you talk about those just endorphins or whatever they are, that cocktail of incredible brain chemicals you get, that is it's addictive, but it's not a defining factor of what love is.
Well, the reality is like, unless you're very successful and have a bunch of money and you don't really care about whether the girl has good character or not, you just want hot chicks to bang, you can live that lifestyle. It's not going to be very fulfilling in the long term, and you might have a bunch of kids that you end up paying alimony for, some crazy, insane women that you have to get restraining orders on and put in jail, which does happen quite often. I've heard stories about this just last night. Very successful men have these problems, guys, with very beautiful women. So if you're going down that road, or if you're not going down that road, and say you just want like a beautiful woman with a good character, that's the needle in the haystack, number one. You're not going to be able to serial that type of strategy. It's not going to happen. You're not going to serial date multiple good character, beautiful women. They just don't exist.
Well, it wouldn't be the goal for any Christian man anyway.
No. Well, that's what I'm saying. So, like, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, like,
in the end.
he was
any
bringing
way
up,
you kind of cut it, to kind of go live in that
I think
phase.
the answer to the question is, because when you're looking at it from a secular standpoint, it seems brazen and sort of lacking thoughtfulness. Let's get married in 3 months or a year. And they're looking at the Christian couple and saying, well, you should have figured each other out. You're still in that Twitter-pated, heightened, cocktail of love chemical phase. Why not wait that out? And then when that's done, you'll be able to see the real version of that person, and that's probably what you'd hear. But they're forgetting the third person in the room, right? So that's where there's an extreme difference between the way that we as believers look at a relationship and the way we're accountable to God, rather than somebody who's secular. And it's like, well, what's the newest article on how men and women should interact? How do I tell you're right, and how do I tell I'm right, or who's being listened to the most? You don't know how many times couples deal with that. They're like, well, I was talking for I've been listening. You hear this. It's like, well, who's going to say? Maybe it's the wife who's been listened to the most, or maybe it's the husband you don't know. It's why that's why a lot of those marriages fail, is because the accountability function only works if you have a foundation of moral and ethical structure that you can both relate to. It doesn't work if you don't, because then it's just an opinion.
It's equally yoked.
Well, and
but I'd like to point out the way people meet. Like, if you lived in the same town, and like a lot of old, like back in the day, they would be like, oh, little Jilly would really work well for little Edward, And like these were older parents. They had matchmakers a lot of times. Like the Jews use this quite a bit, and a lot of cultures use this, where it wasn't these two adolescents choosing each other so much as it was like the people that understood them, these elderly people that they were like matching them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like within the dating apps and all that stuff. There's not the people don't know how they learn by making mistakes. They don't understand. They don't have that third, like John's talking about, third person in the room. Well, like you have family, you have like a lot of things. That's why people are like, hey, like do you want to come meet my family? Like if you're serious about somebody, or you want to, because you trust your family to be like, do you like this person? And they're going to embarrass you, and that it's going to be awkward. And then you're also looking at this person, like how are they going to handle my family? How are they going to handle these odd moments? And that's a big way. Like you can't just meet somebody that you're like, you have to take all that into account, especially if you're young right now. Don't just hit the dating apps and expect to meet somebody and go off on your own.
I was
like,
always
no one's
excited.
Telling the truth. No one's being honest. It's very hard to find people
facades.
It's everyone's putting on a giant facade. Dude.
I was always excited when I was in my dating years when somebody knew somebody, or they knew their family. Like there was some legit background that they could be like, this person, I know him. And I'd be like, well, I'm excited for that, because when you meet somebody out of the internet, you don't have that, and you're definitely going to see a facade, and no man can judge another man. I mean, this just or another woman.
My mother, which case,
and even then, it's rough. But I was always really excited by that. Like I always wanted to have. Never happened. Never.
Well, did I have in the same town for a long time? Generally,
yeah, or somebody. Yeah, there has to be
that growing
circumstances that give that. That opportunity to arise. But I always was excited by it. I was always like, well, you know what, that's something to bet on right there.
It's like a present, Someone knows you, they give you good presents.
But, again, that the red pill preaching point to say, work on yourself as an individual before you go into design, or even thinking you deserve a relationship.
Well, and then spinning plates,
I think that's
too. That's how he's telling them to learn about women.
And that's where I kind of am like, that's where I talk about Paul saying, learn about teaching. If you can treat them properly as a sister, and you can hold your mind to that, even around attractive women, without sexualizing them, then you're starting to turn into a man. Then you're starting to know what a man is like. Then you're starting to know how to treat a woman, and your interactions will be cultivated to the point where you can treat a wife the way a wife needs to be. So when you're young, you don't want that. Let's be honest. That's the nasty homework that you just don't want to get into. But that fortunately will make you a better provider and a loving partner.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, because like when I was young and I thought about my wife, like I thought about all kinds of stuff I wanted to do for her. Like it was like I thought about making a family, like the small interactions we would have. Like it was a whole lot more than just like, oh, I want to plow this beautiful woman every time I come home from work.
When you were younger, like, because I had those thoughts. I had those thoughts weirdly enough, and I want to know if it's the same way for you. When I was like up until around like 6th grade, I had it from like being, I think,
the puberty.
Yeah, as soon as those hormones kicked on, it was like sex.
Yeah,
for me. But I did have those thoughts.
Well, I was like, I think for a lot of guys, it's like you do have the sex, but then again, you're also like you do want the wife, So it's like you are contending against those thoughts, and sure, it's like brutal, but at the same time, you're like.
But was it like that for you when you were younger?
It was more romantic
when you were younger.
Yeah,
me too.
I mean, when I get older, of course, your hormones kick on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Change the landscape a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a great thing. And, if you're young and you don't have an idea of what you want to do or any special interests and all you want is a wife and you think that's going to fix all your problems, maybe you should it will add problems. Take a step back and just take a step back for a second there. It's not because you don't have a wife that you're not happy.
Don't try to find a wife if you're not happy. Don't make her the reason for your happiness. It's
not fair to her.
That's definitely going to fail.
Yeah.
100%. Christ should be your source of happiness and joy.
Yeah.
And it should be hers too.